Guys, I recently took a new position in my W-2 job. You probably know that if you've been following me for a minute. But this job, it's bigger. There's more responsibility, and there's a whole hell of a lot more moving parts to it. But here's the thing. Relationships were torn down. People had given up, and goals, they weren't being met. And the company wants quick results. I get it. I want results too. But here's the struggle. Anyone can jump into a spot like this and force short-term results with really bad leadership. You can push, you can demand, and you can drive people hard. But that's not what builds a winning culture that lasts. And I don't want to be that guy who got in there and got results for a year, and then it collapsed to where it was worse than before. So here's the question of the day. How do you balance the pressure for immediate results while building a long-term culture that actually lasts?
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in The Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Before we get started here today, guys, I want to invite you to leave this show a rating and a review. That helps us stay relevant and help leaders grow. Don't miss the chance to share this episode with other people who may need it. Just hit that share button and give it to a friend. Hit that subscribe button also so you don't miss a beat. Finally, let's get into it. As I stated, results is what the company's looking for. They're looking at all the metrics to be going in a positive direction. Profits, customer fulfillment, and all of the rest of the metrics. And guys, all of these are the same results that I'm looking for as well. We're not misaligned. They're indicators of success, and I totally get that this is what's needed, and there's ways to do that quickly. And it's tempting, right? It's always tempting to use the approach of pushing hard, demanding performance. And we could probably see a very quick spike in results. But the question becomes, what's the cost of this approach? I've seen leaders do this approach before. The quick win approach, the pressure, and the demanding. I've seen leaders do it before. I've also seen it never last. The moment that the pressure is off the team collapses because they weren't built up. They were forced into compliance. And if the pressure stays on, it's even worse because you lose your team. You lose the motivation. You lose their want to win. And they feel like beat dogs. I want to tie in a little bit of a story here. Yesterday, I went to jiu-jitsu, and we had Professor Mike filling in for my normal professor. Professor Mike's a black belt, and he speaks in a way that I'm wired to hear very well. And even though he said something that I've heard 1,000 times, it hit me in a different way yesterday. And that was, he was talking about position over submission. So in jiu-jitsu, if you chase the submission too early, you lose your position and you get reversed. And it's the same way in leadership. If you don't take the time to establish the right position, any win that you get is temporary. Any win that you get is temporary. So if you take the time to establish the culture, it takes a little bit longer to get those wins, but those wins become more permanent. Guys, let's get into answering the question clearly about how to balance immediate results with long-term culture. So the key to all this is you got to balance some sort of short-term execution in with your long-term positioning. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're working for someone else, hell, even if you're working for yourself, you're going to get some pressure. You're going to get some pressure either from the powers that be or from the marketplace. One of the two things is going to happen. But let's start with step one here. And, well, let's go back for just a second. In an earlier episode, I talked about culture and how to build culture. But I want to bring it back to this idea of culture is actually a formula. And that formula states, for the numerator, what we're talking about is constant behaviors. And for the denominator, it's over time. So constant behaviors, that starts with expectations. Continuous expectations helps build constant behaviors, which over time builds a culture. All right, so let's get into that step one. So step one is really, we need to get a quick win or some quick wins under our belt. But we got to do it the right way. People like momentum overall. You know, a vision is great, and I talk about vision a lot, but you can't just be stuck on a vision because the vision is long term. You also need some early wins to build buy-in. To build buy-in with your team as well as your superiors. So here's how you do it. You need to go out there and identify one or a couple things that can be improved quickly without compromising the culture. So at work, that might look like some sort of immediate cost control or improve one key process to fix a bottleneck or something that you can do to boost team morale through a small but really meaningful initiative. And at home, what you can do is you can find one small change that improves family connection. For example, you can commit to 15 minutes of undistracted time with your spouse or kids every day. And what I want you to do is I want you to focus on the impact, not the intensity. The win should show people that following your leadership leads to positive results. And I want you to avoid this mistake. Don't go for quick wins that contradict your long-term vision. They need to be in alignment. So for example, if you want to build trust, don't get an early win by micromanaging because that's going to backfire later. Now, there's a fine line in between that because sometimes people don't see what they don't see. So you might need to go out and pull one of your leaders over and just show them what you're seeing and ask them to take care of it. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to override their authority in that space with going out and saying, do this, do this, do this, and telling all other people what to do and not giving them that chance to correct it. Step two is reinforce the position every single day. All right, so here's why you need to do that. Culture is not built through a single speech or one big action. It's built through daily reinforcement. You need to clarify your standards. What behaviors are acceptable and what behaviors are unacceptable. And you need to communicate those daily. Small, simple reminders are way more effective than long-winded explanations. So we've all seen these different type of leaders, right? The ones like Jocko Willink that come in and they have a message. It's clear, it's concise, and it's very impactful. Now you take that and you use that small, clear, concise message and just repeat it at a frequency. It's way better than someone who comes in and gives you the college dissertation on that same thing. You're like, what the hell did they just say? I don't even know what I'm supposed to do now. And then you need to be the example, guys. Your actions, they set the tone for the entire culture. If you want accountability, you need to be accountable. If you want discipline, you need to be disciplined. I've often seen the guy who talks about discipline and is not disciplined in his life. He's fat, he's lazy, he doesn't put in that extra time when needed. He comes in at 9 o'clock and leaves at 3 and expects everybody else to do 12 to 16 hours a day. That's not right. If you want discipline, you need to be disciplined. If you want accountability, you need to hold yourself accountable. And then use positive reinforcement. Celebrate and highlight behaviors that align with the culture that you're building. Sometimes leadership is not going to be able to see. They just don't have a line of sight to, and when I'm talking leadership, I'm talking about the people above you. They might not see the small things that you're working on to create this enormous culture that you're building. So it's up to you as the direct leader to celebrate and highlight those behaviors that boost your team up in the culture that you're building. You have to be the visionary for them as well as for the people that you work for. So at work, if you're building a culture of ownership, you need to publicly acknowledge when someone takes responsibility. At home, if you want better respect and communication, be the first to listen and speak with respect, even when it's tough. Out in your community, if you're trying to create a standard, hold yourself to it first before expecting anybody else to follow it. And on this step of reinforcing your position every single day, what I want you to avoid at all costs is never assume people understand your vision after one conversation. Culture shifts happen through repetition. Again, constant behaviors over time. Before I get into the third and final step, let me correct myself for a minute. I've been saying constant behaviors over time. What I really meant to say is consistent behaviors over time. Not really sure why I use the word constant instead of consistent, but consistent makes a whole hell of a lot more sense. Anyways, let's get into step 3. Play the long game without ever apologizing for it. And this is why it matters, guys. A weak leader bends every time there's resistance. A strong leader stays the course even when it's hard. And I talked about it. You know, there's a lot of pressure that comes to being a culture builder because people want to see results. And I get that. And it's tempting to go out there and at the cost of your culture, at the cost of your team, to go out there and get those instant results. I get it. The temptation is strong. But you're going to be a much more respected leader from your team as well as your superiors when you do it the hard way. So set expectations with your key players. Let your team know that the real change is going to take time, but you're committed to this change. Be upfront with your leadership. If your higher ups are pushing for quick results, manage those expectations the best that you can. Let them know what you're working on. Let them know your wins, but also tell them, I'm going to deliver these results, but I'm going to need to do it in a way that creates long-term success, not just these short-term spikes. And that's a hard conversation to have, but you need to have it. And stick to your principles, even when you're pressured. Every leader is going to get tested. You'll have moments when it's going to be easier to compromise. But those moments determine the culture that you create. And guys, I'm telling you that this is hard. I'm going through this right now, and I'm getting tested. And there's moments when it's easier for me to compromise. And I've struggled with it. Because sometimes it's just easier as men for us to follow than it is to lead. Let's get into a couple of examples. At work, if you're building that culture of accountability, don't ignore small infractions just to avoid conflict. You have to continuously build that accountability. At home, if you're trying to create better family connection, don't abandon your commitments just because it feels awkward. I remember when I started praying with my children, I felt awkward, like if we were at a hotel and my wife was right there, because I would always take my kids to their bedrooms and pray with them in private. And it was weird praying in front of her while she's, getting things ready for the kids to go to bed or what have you. But you need to continue at it because it's important. In leadership, if you're mentoring others, don't switch to shortcuts when people don't immediately respond. Avoid at all costs allowing the short-term pressures dictate your leadership. If you keep bending, you're not going to build that thing that lasts. You're not going to build that culture that you're searching for, that the people need, that the company needs. You can be the type of leader who gets quick wins and burns out your people. Or you can be the leader who builds something that wins for years. Which one do you want to be? If you're serious about stepping into real leadership, not just at work, but at home and out in your community, I want you to reach out to me to find out more about this program that I run called the Forged Leader Blueprint. Because leadership isn't about quick wins. It's about winning for life, guys.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.